Imagine for a moment a world where your intellectual freedom is restricted. Your ability to learn, explore, engage with a diverse range of ideas, all censored, controlled by the government, schools, libraries, you name it, just not you. And no, I'm not talking about China. I'm talking about right here in the US and right now. Think Tank of 3 starts now. Welcome to the Think Tank of 3 podcast. I'm Julie Holton with Reischea Canidate-Kapasouris. Our third today is Kara White. She is an experienced journalist, library professional, book blogger, business student, and all of these experiences give her a really unique perspective on censoring literature. Kara, I'm so glad to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Kara, it feels like there is an alarming movement in our country, a growing movement banning books, which to me in 2023 sounds absolutely ludicrous. What are the numbers actually showing? Is this a trend that is actually on the rise, or is it just something that we're noticing more of?
It is on the rise. There has been an alarming increase in the number of book bans and challenges in the past few years. The American Library Association documents book challenges throughout the U.S., and that group found challenges in 2022 were nearly double that of the year before. That brought it to the highest number of attempted book bans since the ALA started compiling data on it about 20 years ago. They found 1,269 demands to censor library books and resources in 2022. And keep in mind, those are just the challenges that were reported. Some may not have been. That really may be the tip of the iceberg. Most book challenges targeted books and materials in school libraries, classroom libraries, school curricula. Another like 41% of challenges or so happened in public libraries.
It just blows my mind. It's astounding to me that the majority of these conflicts, as you're describing them, are happening in academic areas where we're meant to be learning, whether it's schools, academic libraries. This issue has become highly politicized, as most issues are. On one side, generally, we have Republicans, especially in red states, who are leading efforts to remove books and censor curriculum. They say their focus is parents' rights. I want to dive into that in a moment. On the other side, Democrats say that book bans limit personal freedoms. So I want to be clear on today's podcast. We are not taking political sides. We're going to try at least to approach this from all angles, kind of the human side, if you will. Kara, you've brought up the American Library Association. It opposes book bans and censorship in general and has been a longstanding advocate for intellectual freedom. So regardless of politics or religious beliefs or moral beliefs, the ALA says we should keep books on shelves. Tell us why.
Well, the ALA put out a statement a year or two ago as they began to see this rise in book bans and challenges that were coming about, sort of reiterating their support of their libraries and their role in intellectual freedom and fighting censorship. They believe that libraries fulfill the promise of the First Amendment when they make available the widest possible range of viewpoints, ideas, so that every person has the opportunity to freely read and consider information for themselves, regardless of that content or the viewpoint of the author. And I would say it's not that every book is for every reader, or even that every idea is a good idea. The point is making sure that those ideas and viewpoints are out there for every individual to read, consider, and evaluate for themselves.
Doesn't the very idea or thought of the ban just kind of fly in the face of what some of these arguments are? These arguments are about proper education of their child, and it's like, okay, but if you're trying to properly, quote, educate or have big thinkers, raise people who are going to lead the world, closing off whole pieces of reading Does that not fly in the face of that?
Those who fight against book bans would certainly argue that it does, right? A lot of arguments about book bans and challenges do center on this idea of parents' rights. Those who are challenging books will say that they have a right to control, the books that are available to the children out there and make sure it kind of supports their value system. But it brings up questions, right? What about the rights of parents who do want these books available to their children and their students? What about the intellectual rights of students themselves? It's a more nuanced conversation, I think, than gets presented. Most book bans and challenges, as we're seeing taking place in, school libraries and in public libraries, they often focus on, books that are deemed, young adult in that genre. When it comes to children and young people and access to library materials, the American Library Association will tell you that their policy is that parents and only parents have the right and responsibility to restrict access to library resources to their children and only their children. So it's one thing if, as a parent, you believe a particular book or title is not right for your family or your child. That is within a role as a parent. That's parenting, right? Making those sorts of decisions. It's when a parent or other adults try to block access for all children to a book that you cross over from parenting and good decision making for your particular family into the realm of censorship.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I love my neighbors, but I don't necessarily love them enough to have them be making the decisions for what books that my child has access to. And I think that this might be even one of the misconceptions that are out there about book bans. Can you talk more about, Kara, what you see from your point of view? What are some of the realities of these book bans?
Well, most of the books that are challenged or restricted or targeted for removal are by or about people of color or members of the LGBT community. You'll see that time and time again. Often books, when there are complaints lodged against them, the complaint is that they're sexually explicit in some way. But when you really look at it, the titles that come up over and over as most frequently challenged are by or about members of those traditionally marginalized groups. That's just what the data shows. I think as far as misconceptions that may be out there, what I think about is when we hear about this big increase and the numbers reflect, the big increase in book bans and challenges, or maybe we see like a viral video of like a school board meeting that devolves into like this screaming match, and the headlines that we maybe see on social media, it can lead to the impression that somehow everyone wants these books removed, that this big movement to ban books has this huge like groundswell of support. But really the data doesn't show that. Most public polling will show voters across the political spectrum do not support book bans, and that they do trust the library professionals and teachers in their communities to, curate library collections with care. What we have, it would seem, is really a very vocal and well-organized, extremely well-organized minority who are pushing for these bans. Actually, one way that they have been so successful is the use of book lists. Traditionally, if somebody had a complaint about a book, they'd walk into a library and say, this book, I don't like this particular book, and I think you should remove it. What's happening now is these organized censorship groups will put out these lists of books that they think should be removed. So someone will walk into a library with a whole list of titles that they think should be removed or restricted. And the ALA says that contributed significantly to the number of challenges in 2022. Their numbers that they put out said of the overall number of books challenged, 90% were part of attempts to censor multiple titles at once. 40% of cases involved 100 books or more. Can you imagine walking into a library with a list of 100 books you wanted pulled? Prior to 2021, the vast majority of challenges to library resources only sought to remove or restrict a single book. And not that removing even a single book is okay, but you can imagine the impact it has dealing with a challenge to a single title versus a list of 50, 75, 100 titles at a time.
Which also speaks to, because I just finished had to refine an article, make sure I have my numbers correct. I think there was about 11 people, less than a dozen people, who were the cause of some 1,000 book ban requests. And it's like, wait, what? And like you said, if you come in with a list of, let's say, 30 books, I really would like to know, did you read all 30 of these books, or is these just this list that has been compiled? Prior to us starting this recording, we were talking about an author, Jerry Craft, who's the author of the New Kid graphic novel series. And Jerry Craft is actually from not that far up the road from me. I live in Stamford, Connecticut, and he's from Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is about 25 minutes from where I live. And the series, if you haven't read it, yes, I'm about to blow the series up. It's fantastic. Go get this series. It's a great read. It's a great read for middle schoolers. It's wonderful. But one of the things that he was even talking about when there was a situation in Texas and a situation in Pennsylvania, and a parent was saying how, well, this is teaching critical race theory. And he responded with, I did not realize I was teaching critical race theory. I was writing about my experience growing up and trying to put a different light on it. And I was watching an interview where he talked about how, the history of America is complicated. It's harsh. It's hard. It can be painful. Slavery is a real thing, no matter what anybody wants to say. It happened. And it has to be learned about so that we don't repeat it, right? And he was saying that, unfortunately, the other side of that is when all you're learning about is all the negativity of the Black experience, that does leave people feeling some kind of way. And he's like, I wanted to put something out there that was real, that someone could relate to, that wasn't necessarily just all sad and heartbreaking and, but still real, dealing with real stuff. And it was interesting because the question being asked is, can you empathize with the parent who says, I'm not too sure about that. I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with my child reading the mild undertones that they didn't realize were racist comments or things that people say and do in regular everyday life that no one picks up. We hear the term microaggressions, right? And his response, which was so classic because I've said this so many times, he's like, the question is, can you empathize with my discomfort and be able to put yourself in my shoes? So I've said this before time and time again. I am not concerned, or I am no longer concerned in my adulthood with making you comfortable with my personal discomfort. And that's what we've done for so very long. So when you have the ability to put a book together that's graphically pleasing, that tells fun stories, that puts kids in a light that they can actually relate to and learn from and say, I never thought about that. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to rethink how I approach things. I'm sorry. I don't see what's negative about that, except that you didn't read it. You saw it on a list and you decided to go forward with this. Don't indoctrinate my child, even though I have no idea what I'm talking about when I'm talking about indoctrinating my child. It's frustrating as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. That was my diatribe.
No, well, there's this great idea that, that books can be, windows and doors, right, into other worlds, into other people's lives. And, we don't always know what we're going to find or what we're going to see when we look through those windows or go through those doors, but, studies show that reading doesn't just improve a child's, cognitive development. They can enhance empathy and understanding. And fiction is a great way to step into other people's lived experiences in really a very safe way, in a very, personal, but safe and quiet way for all of us. You're just wrapped up in the story of a book. What a wonderful way to step out of our own lives, step out of our own selves, and experience something new.
We don't have this uprising about the media or like generally like TV shows and whatever shows you can stream on Netflix or other platforms. I mean, to some extent, yes, but I don't see the same movement happening with media. And research would show that what our kids see on their TV screens or on their computer screens, on their cell phones that they're watching on YouTube, that what they're seeing could be more influential than even the books they're reading. And so, but what I also don't understand is, it all comes back to our First Amendment rights. And where do you draw the line? And why is the line being drawn with something that is related to race and ethnicity or the LGBTQ plus related materials? Why is that where the line is being drawn? It seems to me, and I'm not the scholar of the three of us, but it seems to me that that's, like those are very specific, very targeted issues. And then to just generally put this statement out there that, oh, well, we're protecting our children, or, we're protecting, like, from what? From those two specific topics?
Well, book bans and challenges are certainly nothing new. I mean, they've been around and have, occurred across the country at all times. They generally do reflect the larger, social concerns of each age, right? And we're certainly seeing that now. Questions about race, gender, sexuality, those are playing out in all levels of our society across our country. And we're seeing that reflected in the types of challenges and efforts to ban books today. It's simply the playing field that it's on right now.
Okay, I'm a parent. I'm seeing this going on. I'm stressed about this going on. I'm lucky to live in an area where, our libraries are like, we're not taking that off the shelf. Not that we haven't had people challenging, but they're like, we're not taking that off the shelf. The library books in and of themselves is a whole nother conversation. What is it that I, as the parent, I, as the teacher, or I, as the whomever who is really troubled by what's happening, what can we do with regards to the local library, with regards to the school, to address these attempts at bans, these attempts at censorship? How can we fight against that?
First, it's paying attention, right? It's very easy to think that, well, this isn't happening in my community. It's not happening in my child's school. It's easy to think that perhaps, but it is happening across the country. So educate yourself about the books that are being challenged or potentially banned. As you say, read them. Read a few of them for yourself. Read reviews of the books from multiple sources. See what other people are also saying about these books. Sometimes, as we've talked about, the people who challenge books will do so on the basis of a single illustration or a single passage. But books exist in their entirety. We say don't judge a book by its cover. Well, also don't judge it by that, one picture on page 35 or the one paragraph on page 75. Books have to be considered as a whole. So do your homework, see what's actually going on in the book. The American Library Association has a number of resources on their website and toolkits that you can look into about ways to combat challenges in your community. And I would say if you feel strongly about it, speak up. It may feel like you're not alone, but as we say, most people actually do not support book bans and challenges. So you're not alone. Attend that public meeting, write that letter to your school board or other elected officials. They are hearing a lot from these vocal, organized groups. Make sure they hear from you.
We spent a lot of time focusing on the younger children and perhaps some of the censorship that's focused around and I can I can kind of wrap my brain around that a little bit, that perhaps there are parents that think that some topics or titles may not be an appropriate fit for their child at that age, for instance, or at that point in their development process. Maybe there are concepts or different types of things that parents don't want them to be exposed to. Although I think it's pretty obvious that I land in the space of having each parent decide for their own family instead of for families at large. But aside from, the younger, students and the school libraries and public libraries, I want to turn to the academic libraries, because it seems that in academia, that's where our students, our adults are able to really explore and learn, and where a lot of big concepts can come together. There's so much potential for opportunity there. How have book bans impacted academic libraries?
There are certainly a lot of discussions across, universities and college campuses, whether it's sort of, faculty freedom and faculty viewpoints on what to present. Academic libraries still strive to offer, again, the wide range of viewpoints that are out there. Academic libraries also want to make sure that they are serving the research and academic needs of their universities, a science or a university that focuses on mostly science programs, they're going to have a lot more books that support instruction and research in those areas than, say, one that provides mostly liberal arts degrees. Overall, academic libraries are not seeing anywhere near the level of book bans and challenges that school and public libraries are. That's really where the thrust of the challenges are occurring. I think it's like 1% of book bans and challenges documented were taking place at academic college libraries or other public institutions like that. Most are really happening, or almost entirely happening, at the school K-12 level and public libraries. Though it's also worth noting that books are not the only things being challenged at libraries, school and public libraries. Well, obviously that's the biggest number of challenges are to books, physical books on the shelves. Certainly ebook collections have been targeted. Programming, children's programming or adult programming has been challenged. Public meeting space, most notably like drag queen story hours have proven very controversial in past years, people targeting and challenging those. Displays and exhibits have been targeted, movies, even library databases. So while books are certainly seeing the highest number of restrictions and censorship attempts, it's not by any means the only way that people are trying to restrict access.
I find this also interesting because on one hand, like you said, this is nothing new. This was something that was done. This is centuries old. Let's face it, we had a whole time where women reading was like, how dare you? You're not allowed, you are literally not allowed to learn to read. So the fact that we have a situation with individuals trying to keep books out of people's hands, but I also feel like, are they not perhaps having the completely opposite effect? As a youth, as a parent, as a curious being, when someone says don't do that, aren't you automatically drawn to do it? Right? We don't want you to read that book. Well, now I want to go find out what's in this book that has you so up in arms. And Kara, you're so right when you say, they'll base something on a passage or a picture or something that, like, one little tidbit within the story, and you can't take the tidbit of the entire story. I had a conversation with a friend of mine last year, and she one of the books that the parents were up in arms about here at our school district had some passage. I don't even remember the name of the book, but there was some descriptive in there, and I said, listen, unless it's an assigned book for your child, he's not going to have to read it. But even if he does, and he has questions, and I think that's what it was, he didn't know what it meant, and he asked her. I said, isn't that the very thing you want? Your child read something, they didn't understand it, they went to you, the parent, and said, what is this? Which is actually a great thing because, oh my gosh, I have an opportunity to have a dialogue with my child, to communicate, to learn about it. And if I don't know, I've said it to my son, if I don't know, then we'll look it up together. We'll figure it out, So I just feel like they are not even knowingly shutting down communication with their own kid. Because the other thing I told her was, just because your child is clear about who he is and how he was born, I said, I guarantee you there is a child in his class who didn't, who already felt this way for years and had nowhere to turn. And you've got to remember that just because your child is all set and clear and has no question, there's a kid in his class that does. And that kid has been in his class for a couple of years. And then she looked at me and she goes, I never, ever thought about that in that way. I'm like, and that's the point. If you're just going to argue about that little segment and not think more deeply about what would draw someone to write a story like this to begin with, chances are it's coming from a place of experience. And they're trying to allow a conversation, a necessary conversation to be had. It's, we could go on about this for years.
I love
Hours.
this though. You're describing the power that books have. And part of that power is to create dialogue, especially if it's between, like in your example, between children and their parents. Or, you know, if there is a student in his class who's been struggling or wondering or who knows what, now there's an opportunity for the student to talk to other students, to talk to their peers. Maybe now they might understand, or it creates that window for them to have a discussion. I mean, I can't help, you guys, I don't know where your brains go with this, but I can't help when I even hear the term book ban or censorship, like it takes me back to when I was in school and we were learning about the Nazis, you know, burning books in the streets and trying to control the information by you know, eliminating books. And so when I hear about these movements happening across our country, I can't help but feel like what are we going to get out our pitchforks and, you know, our torches and just like light the world on fire? Because what are we actually doing? We're censoring and we're like now creating this propaganda funnel, if you will, like that only certain things can be allowed. That is not what this country was founded on. And I just can't help but wonder about the long-term impact of this. You know, Kara, what are some of the long-term or the potential long-term consequences when it comes to censorships and book bans? You know, for example, if the voices of 11 people are really allowed to control what the rest of the US is able to access, what does that look like long-term?
Sure. And that's a great question, because we are still going to see this play out in libraries for some time, because the sort of what they refer to as the, you know, insidious and chilling impact of these book bans long term. You know, when a book list is compiled and those books are removed from the shelves, we may, you know, mourn that, we may be angry about it, but we know what those books are, right? There's literally a list of them. We can track it, we can count the numbers, we can get the data on it. We know which books these are. What about the book challenges that are not reported, first of all, that are just quietly removed, that may not even follow the processes that a library or school has for challenging a book? They bypass that formal process and just pull it anyways. We don't know what titles those are. What about books that never even get purchased or put on the shelves in the first place? A teacher who decides, you know what, I really like this book. I think it might be great for my students, but a parent might complain, and I'm a little worried about that, so I'm not even going to put it on the shelf to begin with. We don't know what books those are. There was a recent survey, I think it was last spring, of school librarians that showed just the possible reaction from parents, administrators, or the community influenced their decision not to purchase a book for their collections. You know, kind of extrapolating even out from that. What about books not published or even written because of fear that it's going to be attacked or challenged? We don't know, you know, the full impact of that, what we'd be missing out on in the future because those books were never even allowed to, you know, be on a shelf or written anyway. You know, as we say, books can inspire. We've talked about that a couple of times already, but only if writers have the freedom to imagine them and to write them, and if we as readers have the freedom to access them.
Talk about, if you would, with our younger generations, the importance of intellectual freedom, because that's the other part of this. Is there is a group of kids that are going to be coming up that don't necessarily know that these arguments are happening, and depending on which way, you know, the scale tips, maybe more books come off shelves, maybe these things are happening, maybe they aren't. But talk about the importance of that intellectual freedom and the development of those minds to make certain that we're not harming them, because removing books, I feel, is harmful. It takes away knowledge.
Mhm. Absolutely. And so, you know, we've talked about a number of times sort of the power of books, the power of books to inspire, how books, you know, spark our imaginations, you know, nonfiction books that inform us about our world and where we live, advances in science. There's numerous examples of how science fiction of today becomes the science of tomorrow. We kind of short circuit ourselves and our own advancement when we don't allow for that sort of exploration of our own minds, of our worlds, of our imaginations. Intellectual freedom is so important. It's also sort of like a lofty term, right? It's a very academic sort of lofty term. I kind of want to think about it in this way. Think about a book that you read that you loved, maybe as a child or as a young adult. Think of a book you loved. It doesn't have to have, changed your worldview, although maybe it did. Maybe it was just a book that brought you joy. All right. And now when you've got that title in your head, think about you've never read that book. You never read that book. You never saw that book because somebody else, someone you don't know, decided you shouldn't. And that sense of sadness, that little sense of loss that you're feeling right now, because of this book that was so important to you personally, the idea that you never would have read it, that's what's at stake here. That's what we talk about on a personal level when we talk about intellectual freedom.
That's heavy. I think about even books that I don't fully remember, but I remember enough that they had an impact on me. I mean, I was a voracious reader as a kid. I was the kid whose dad was like, put the book down and get outside. And then I just take the book outside with me.
With you.
That was me. I mean, I just loved reading and I read all sorts of books. And, looking back, I really think that it's what has inspired my love for traveling and different cultures and wanting to meet new people and see different places. And, I'm curious, Kara, your thoughts on books that are being revised or rewritten. For instance, in 2011, a publisher released a new version of Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I loved Huck Finn as a kid. I don't even remember, reading the N-word, now fast forward to me as an adult, all these years later, I don't even remember this, but apparently a publisher released a new version of the book, replacing the N-word with the word slave in an attempt, as Reischea was saying earlier, to make the discomfort a little more palatable. And but the change was highly controversial because some people said, well, now you're sanitizing the reality of what actually happened in history, and we can't just water this down. This is, reality. And then, of course, other people said, well, that doesn't belong in children's literature, that that we can get the sentiment across without using words that we don't want our children to be using, or whatever, they're saying on the other side. But, it's like, is this an attempt to rewrite history? Or is this on the other side? I'm trying to see both sides of this here. Is this a way to take some of the controversy out so that the underlying meaning and emphasis is still there, but without putting people, kind of polarizing people onto different sides? I mean, is revising, something that works, or should this just be off the table? Is this another form of censorship?
And I think, that's an ongoing conversation, and I think a very worthy one. As you say, each side, has an argument, a point of view to be put out there about why they do or do not want to kind of make these revisions to books. Some authors have come out, strongly against them. It's a discussion that, libraries have as well. If you have a library with an old collection, you're eventually going to find some books in there that have some very, let's say, old viewpoints expressed in them. And often with what we would consider very outdated notions of, let's say, race or gender roles. And what do libraries do with them? We talk about censorship. If they remove those books from their shelves, is that not just another form of censorship? I don't know that I'm ready to weigh in completely on that today with you, whether or not we should revise Huck Finn or not, or to remove some of that more problematic language. But I think the conversation has value and is a part of the larger debate and considerations we're having over the books that are out there today and in the future.
I do appreciate the conversation, and Reischea, I want you to jump in, but I just want to say I find value in having these conversations, no matter where people end up in the world of, yes, we should revise, or no, we should not. When I was looking some of this up, for instance, like Thomas the Tank Engine. I remember my brother just loving Thomas the Tank Engine when he was little. And I had no idea that some of the stories are pretty sexist, pretty male dominant. And so does the feminist in me appreciate that, the author would go back and revise that to make it a little less sexist? I don't know that that sounds like such a bad idea, especially if it's something that's being used to teach little boys about, in relationships with little girls and vice versa, maybe not a bad thing. So I don't know even where I stand on it, but I always appreciate having the conversation, especially when people on both sides can come together and say, yeah, there may not be a one size fits all solution for all of this. I mean, Reish, what do you think?
I think it's a good conversation to have, but I am hard on the don't touch it. Don't change it. What you can do as a publisher, as a movie producer, as a studio, is put an addendum at the front that says content in this book represents blah, 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 whatever it is. I just finished watching the original animated Aladdin, and they have a slate before the movie starts that says depictions of people in this movie are basically saying it's not good. It's showing them as slave, this, and that, and the other, to warn your viewer, this is how these things were viewed. It's not right, but this is what it was. Because when you start changing things, you change the content, you change the whole meaning. You change how the story hits you. So if it hit you hard and harshly, it should hit you hard and harshly because that's how it was written. So now what do we do about it? So I don't believe anything should be changed, but I do feel that it is perfectly acceptable to put something before you start reading, expressing that why terms and images and certain things in this book now were never acceptable, but it wasn't understood not to be acceptable then. You know what I mean? In those terms, I can't imagine, and especially if it's not the author, I can't imagine someone coming back and changing someone's writing when you aren't the author. It didn't come from your head. It didn't come from your mind. So changing what the author wrote is, to me, that's almost blasphemous, regardless of how awful or great it is. Put an addendum on the front, and then let the reading begin. And then let's have a conversation about, why is this story so troublesome for us today? Why is Thomas the Tank Engine such an issue for women today? That's how you address it, by having conversations about it and understanding why. Okay, so this, we don't really think so greatly about this anymore, do we? How come?
This is also where, like, me being a fan of capitalism comes in, because in Thomas the Tank Engine, for instance, like, we'll just stop putting our money there. Like, we'll put our money someplace else where it teaches more, better messages that are pro-feminist and, or at least like equality for our children. And we'll just let our dollars speak for us.
This has been fantastic, and I don't want it to end. I don't want it to end, but we've got to wrap this up. But Kara, before we do that, we do have our rapid fire questions that we do for all of our guests.
Okay.
So are you ready?
I will do my best, right? Let's do it.
You'll do fabulously. Don't you even worry. Question number 1. What is one piece of advice you would give to aspiring women leaders?
Well, this may seem a bit on the nose given what we've been talking about today, but read widely, read different genres, read different formats, make reading a part of your life. I know it can seem like there's not time for that in your day, but really even 15 minutes reading something, think how much you can read in a week or a month or a year at just 15 minutes a day. And to that, I would add, read women's stories, whether it's memoir or biography or in fiction. And beyond that, read the stories of women who don't look like you. Read the stories of women who live somewhere else than where you live.
Oh, I love that, Kara. Can you share a book, a resource, or a quote that has had a significant impact on your journey?
This is really hard, right? Because how many like books or quotes or resources, your mind is just flooded with all the possibilities. One that I will throw out there, this is a classic book. It's The Awakening by Kate Chopin. This is one that you may have encountered maybe in like a college English class or high school English class. So I'm not going to say it's necessarily the most fun or easy read out there, but it was a book that I encountered in high school that I think showed me what literature could be. And so in that way, it was really formative and helped drive my love of literature and challenge me, to read harder books with more challenging themes, to dig into things, like theme and symbolism and metaphor. It can be hard work, but it's oh so worth it.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would that be?
Well, I'm very much a planner, right? Like I love a to-do list more than anybody. And I love, make plans and goals. And I would say that while if you're a planner and a goal setter, by all means, do that. Make those plans, set those goals, 5-year plan, next month, whatever. But, write it in pencil, not pen. Because I think what I've learned, moving on is that when we get very stuck on a certain plan, a certain goal, a certain outcome, we're either not prepared to deal with the setbacks that may come our way, or we're not prepared to maybe seize some of those opportunities that we didn't even know were coming our way. You got to give yourself a little space to, pivot and change your mind, and that's okay.
Oh my gosh, Julie, how awesome is that? Plan in pencil.
I know. I'm thinking I could give my younger self that advice. Really. In fact, Kara, when I first met you, if you had given me that advice way back in our early Richmond days at WWP, we worked in news together, like a lifetime ago. I could have used that advice for my 20s and 30s and beyond.
Because back then, I would not have necessarily predicted I would be doing the work I'm doing now, or living where I'm living now, or speaking with you now about book bans and challenges. But I'm glad that I am.
Circumstances
Absolutely.
and situations change when you make a plan. Yes. What's the quote? You make a plan and God laughs, or something like that.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's like, it's great to have a plan, but be willing to say, you know what? This plan is changing. There's something else going on here, and I need to go a different direction. I need to replan my plan. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Oh, Kara, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. This has been very helpful, very insightful. And I look forward to hearing from our audience on what they think. Let's have them weigh in. So look forward to that. For now, that is all of this episode of Think of Three.